It's Wednesday, July 19. In the headlines, government adds $14.8 billion to its 2023-2024 national budget. In business news, NCB Group's CEO and deputy are out. Regionally, Cuba and Russia revitalize old ties. Internationally, nearly 24 cities in the U.S. under heat warnings. And in sports, Reggae Boy named in CONCACAF Gold Cup's team of the tournament. This is the news on PBC Jamaica. I'm Simone Absalom Gale. Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Dr. Nigel Clark, says most of the funds from the second supplementary estimates will go towards making payments in the second year of a contract with government employees and employees of public bodies. He made the disclosure while tabling the document in the lower house of Parliament on Tuesday. The finance minister says a number of entities are also being allocated one-off grants or additional subventions to enable them to meet compensation restructures.
Given the effective implementation date of April 1st, 2022, and the fact that discussions with some unions continued into the current fiscal year, it was not possible to build into each head of the 23-24 budget the relevant adjustments to facilitate payment of the second year compensation restructure amounts. As such, an estimated amount for the second year payments was captured in the contingency head of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service.
Dr. Clark says some $8.9 billion of the funds will go towards the public sector compensation exercise in several entities. $1.5 billion to Municipal Corporation, $1.7 billion to the National Water Commission.
Under the recurrent program, the second supplementary estimates also reflects $2.7 billion in value of equipment, including taxes paid on those equipment donated by the People's Republic of China. Madam Speaker, under the government accounting rules, the value of this donation is captured under revenue and also under expenditure. It just has to be recorded.
The additional expenses will be funded by an estimated $9 billion in higher than expected revenues and cash resources.
Or additional subventions to enable them to meet compensation restructure. So these are entities that have other sources of revenue that normally finance their activities that need central government support at this time.
The National Waste Management Authority will also receive $990 million. $166 million will go to the Golden Age homes, $167 million to poor relief officers, and $298 million to infirmaries. The latest estimates for fiscal year 2023-2024 is now estimated at $1.036 trillion, up from $1.021 trillion. Students who are registered under the Program of Advancement Through Health and Education, PATH, will benefit from the Student Loan Bureau's increased grant-in-aid allocations. The number of grants being provided for eligible students from low-income and wards of the state will increase to 4,200, up from 3,000. An agreement has been reached on a new compensation rate for the National Water Commission workers. PBCJ understands that they should begin receiving their salaries at the new compensation rates at the end of August. General Secretary of the Jamaica Association of Local Government Officers, Helene Davis White, told the press that among the areas ironed out was the conversion of the status of traveling officers. Minister with responsibility for skills and digital transformation, Senator Dr. Dana Morris-Dixon, says increased use of digital technology is nothing to be feared. Senator Dixon addressed the issue of digital transformation during Wednesday's post-cabinet press brief. She says it's all about respect, efficiency, inclusion, and trust.
And you know, when you're interacting with government, it's not the most efficient. And a lot of our processes can be done better if we use technology, and we're seeing it in many of our entities where we're seeing much more efficiency gains because of technology.
Senator Dixon also explained the significance of inclusion in digital transformation.
As we do this digital transformation, it's about how we can get every single Jamaican to feel that they're a part of a movement forward.
She says the area of trust is about ensuring that there is security.
Cybersecurity is going to be very central to that, and beefing up our cyber infrastructure as we deliver more services online. The legislative framework is also important because we have some very archaic laws, and some of these laws actually preclude us from doing some of the transformation work and making our government more efficient. And so that's going to be another peg.
Senator Dixon says a national identification card will be critical to digital transformation, adding that some changes will be made to the cards, including an international symbol for the disabled and one for justices of the peace.
There had been some calls for persons living with disabilities to have their own ID, that they could show that they do have a disability. One of the things that was recently approved by Cabinet was for us to have that universal symbol of disability placed on the NIDS card, and that saves our country quite a bit of money because it means that we don't have to print new cards for persons living with disabilities. That will just be now shown on the NIDS card. The NIDS card will also be able to show who is a JP. We won't be able to print those official cards, obviously, until we have NERA in place, because as per the legislation, that's the entity that has to do that. And so until that happens, we won't be able to issue those cards.
Time now for the business report with Danita Rodney.
NCB Financial Group CEO Patrick Hilton and his deputy Dennis Cohen have left the financial group after nearly 2 decades. According to a release from the financial group effective July 18, Hilton and Cohen would proceed on vacation leave, during which time, quote, other arrangements will be made for carrying out their roles on an interim then permanent basis, end quote. This action follows Monday's sudden announcement that Michael Lee Chin, the group's chairman and top shareholder, returned from his leave of absence earlier than expected to assume a more active role in the organization. Now for your market updates. In foreign exchange trading for Tuesday, July 18, the US dollar sold for an average of $155.28. The Canadian dollar ended trading at $117.84. The pound sterling traded for $202.04, and the euro sold for an average of $173.10. In JSE trading, the JSE index advanced by 915 points. The junior market index declined by 9 points. The combined market index advanced by 767 points, and the All Jamaican Composite Index advanced by 1,640 points. Overall market activity resulted from trading in 109 stocks, of which 45 advanced, 50 declined, and 14 traded firm. Stocks advanced for Access Financial Services Limited, Barita Investments Limited, and Berger Paints Jamaica Limited. Stocks declined for 138 Student Living Jamaica Limited, AMG Packaging and Paper Company Limited, and CAC 2000 Limited. Trading firm were Jamaica Stock Exchange, JMMB Group 7% preference shares, and JMMB Group Limited 7.15% cumulative redeemable preference share. The overall volume leaders were Image Plus Consultants Limited with over 50 million units, Trans-Jamaican Highway Limited, and 138 Student Living Jamaica Limited with over 2 million units. In regional stocks, in Trinidad and Tobago, 0 securities traded. On the Barbados Stock Exchange, 0 securities traded. In regional business, creatives of St. Kitts and Nevis will have greater opportunities and potential for growth and development following the official launch of the St. Kitts and Nevis Creativity Economy on July 20. More in this report.
Just days ago at a pre-launch press conference, officials from the Ministry and Department of Creative Economy outlined a host of benefits for creatives in the Federation. One of the key benefits will be access to a 3-tier Creative Arts Fund. Roberto Webb, Director of Creative Economy, explained more about the fund.
Then the Creative Arts Fund. So it's a fund created to stimulate the economic growth of the creative sector and contribute to the advancement of skill set and talent. It aims to finance cultural projects and programs that are designed to develop the creative industries and train creative entrepreneurs. So the grants enable persons to participate in local and overseas events, workshops, seminars, and allow for training, marketing, export, and product development. There will be, that's the Creative Arts Fund, the technical aid, the product development, and the project advancement grants. In the first phase, grant will range from $2,000 up to $15,000. And more details will be made available on July 28th, so you cannot miss the launch. And I know this is something that creators will be totally excited for.
The department is also working on an interactive website for creatives and for the general public, providing an avenue to showcase profiles and to interact with creatives. Glenn Bart reporting for SK Newsline.
In international business, British inflation fell by more than expected in June and was at its slowest in more than a year, according to official data, easing pressure on the Bank of England to keep on raising interest rates sharply.
There was some relief Wednesday for policymakers at the Bank of England. That as inflation slowed more sharply than expected in June, falling to 7.9%. Markets promptly reeled in bets on the pace of future rate rises, sending the pound lower against the dollar. The number also offered hope for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. He has promised to halve inflation by the end of the year, a target Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt has called challenging. On Wednesday, Hunt said there was no room for complacency.
Prices are still rising much too fast. There's a long way to go. If we look at inflation at 3% in the US, 5.5% in the Eurozone, you can see that if we stick to the plan, we can bring down inflation. And that's what this government is utterly determined to do.
The opposition Labour Party, which leads in the polls, has accused the government of presiding over a mortgage catastrophe as borrowers are battered by rising rates. Now the Bank of England is still expected to do a 14th straight hike in early August. But markets think it may just be a 0.25 percentage point, not the half point that had been widely expected. For consumers, the outlook remains tough, however. Though food price inflation also slowed, it still stands at 17.3%, putting a huge strain on household finances. And the BOE doesn't expect overall inflation to fall back below its 2% target until early 2025.
In market data for oil, global oil benchmark Brent hovered above $80, buoyed by China's pledge to re-innovate economic growth and expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve will stop raising interest rates soon. Brent futures were up 64 cents at $80.27 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate crude was up 44 cents to $76.19. And that was the business report on PBCJ. I'm Danita Rodney.
In regional news, Chief Executive Officer of Telecommunication Services of Trinidad and Tobago, Lisa Agard, says the Caribbean is at risk of being left behind, noting that the prospects of 5G in the Caribbean remain low.
Speaking at the Caribbean Association of National Telecommunications Organizations conference on Tuesday, she noted that the investment in 5G technology does not make business sense. And she pointed to a 2030 projection of 5G adoption around the world, with the Caribbean just a measly 2%.
Look at North America, estimated 51% adoption of 5G. Europe, 35%. Greater China, 48%. Asia Pacific, 12%. The Caribbean, 2%. Must we be left behind?
While Ms. Agard noted a significant drop in revenue for telecommunication companies due to less calls being made over the network and more usage of social media platforms to connect. She pointed out that from 2017 to 2021, voice revenue declined from 643 to 348 million, and mobile revenue moved from 1.5 billion to 958 million, while fixed internet revenues only increased by a small percentage.
The decline in revenue over the period in question in Trinidad and Tobago on the mobile and fixed side is a total of $902 million versus the increase in broadband revenue of a mere $215 million. Is there not market failure? Is there not a need for intervention?
Ostracized by the U.S. and the West, Russia and Cuba are reviving old ties. Reports are that Russia is providing Cuba with economic support, while Cuba has abstained from condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine at the UN and has offered Russian companies long-term land concessions and tax breaks.
Towering over the city, the Soviet embassy in Havana was opened in the 1980s, the high point of Cuban-Soviet relations. After the USSR disintegrated, Cuban-Russian relations hit rock bottom before slowly reviving over the last 2 decades. But as this former Cuban diplomat points out, recently the relationship has become much stronger.
If you take the speeches and the political pronunciations of 10 years ago, I think Raúl Castro himself said, we have 3 strategic allies, China, Venezuela, and Vietnam. He didn't mention Russia. Yet, if you say that today, who are these Cuba's strategic allies? Russia will come in the first place.
The catalyst, the war in Ukraine. Russia is not only in need of allies, but hemmed in by Western sanctions, it needs trading partners and places to invest.
Both nations, Russia and Cuba, have unjust sanctions imposed on them that originate from the same enemy, the Yankee Empire.
Havana's position on the war in Ukraine has shifted over time. At first it said that NATO expansion formed the backdrop to the conflict, but it opposed the use of force, a reference to Russia's invasion. At the UN, Cuba has consistently abstained from condemning the invasion. While the US and its NATO allies have rallied around Ukraine, as the war has progressed, Cuba has thrown its lot in with Russia. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel this May even offered his country's unconditional support to Russia's clash with the West. Meanwhile, Russia is providing Cuba with unprecedented economic support. Trade between the two countries tripled last year and is up again this year, mostly Russian oil deliveries, which are helping to keep the lights on. Amid a flurry of trips by senior officials this year, Cuba has given Russian companies long-term land concessions and tax breaks.
Nothing and no one can stop the economic, commercial, financial and cooperative relationship between the governments of Russia and Cuba.
Russia has announced investments in Cuban hotels, liquor and the dilapidating sugar industry. After reneging on normalization, successive US administrations have lashed the island with sanctions over the last 6 years. With its economy in shreds, Cuba is looking for help wherever it can find it. A Russian warship docked in Havana last week, grist to the mill for the US political right that's trying to present Cuba as a national security threat. This ever closer relationship, forged by world events, makes any rapprochement with the US even trickier. Ed Augustin, Al Jazeera, Havana.
St. Kitts and Nevis made its maiden presentation on Tuesday of the Voluntary National Review on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
The delegation from St. Kitts and Nevis, led by Minister Conris Maynard, presented the gains the Federation has made on the Sustainable Development Goals and the challenges that still persist. Minister Maynard, in his presentation, highlighted plans to address water shortage in the country, brought on by the changing climate and persistent drought.
St. Kitts and Nevis has 99% access to clean and safe water and 87% access to sanitation services. However, our country is amongst the most water-scarce countries globally. Water demand already exceeds supply by 27% due to expanding social and economic infrastructure and, importantly, decreasing annual precipitation with about 20% decrease over the last 10 years and 40% decrease so far this year alone, resulting in unavoidable water rationing. Further, our country continues to grapple with increasing saltwater contamination of groundwater supplies due to sea level rise and decreasing aquifer recharge. Desalination is identified as a long-term solution, and work has commenced towards the installation of our first publicly owned desalination plant donated by the United Arab Emirates.
He also spoke to the country's energy situation.
SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. We are pleased to report that access to electricity increased from 93.5% in 2001 to 100% in 2017. However, we presently rely heavily on fossil fuels, leaving our country vulnerable to oil price fluctuations that directly impact electricity costs. Consequently, our government is actively pursuing transition to wind, solar, and geothermal energy. In October 2022, we solidified a partnership with the CDB with the approval of a contingency grant of $17 million to develop a geothermal power plant on Nevis by 2025 with a capacity of 10 megawatts, more than enough to meet the domestic electricity demand on Nevis. Consequently, interconnection of the electrical grids of both islands is now imperative.
In international news, cities and towns across 3 continents are in the grip of heat waves so strong they are breaking records. In the U.S., the city of Phoenix has broken a record set nearly half a century ago of 19 consecutive days of temperatures above 43 degrees Celsius.
For those with no place to call home, it's hard to escape the blistering heat. People like Sean Crow, who lost his job and his apartment 6 weeks ago, make their way to cooling centers to grab some water and relief.
It's getting hotter. It's getting a lot hotter, so this day room over here is really resourceful. I take advantage of their resources and try to get myself put together and get going in a direction. So that's basically what I've been doing for the past month and a half or so, because it gets really hot and it's hard to kind of get up on your feet, especially if you don't have a car.
After 3 days of temperatures exceeding 43 degrees, the number of people seeking help is on the rise, as are calls to emergency responders for heat stroke.
Our shelter is very close to full, about 99% capacity, but we operate with about 100 beds in a reserve that we can, bed mats that we can put on the floor for emergencies and stuff like that. So we've started doing that. We're not at complete capacity yet, but we're over 500, which is our normal capacity for the dorm.
Temperatures topping 43, even 47 degrees are not unheard of here in Nevada. But what is extremely unusual and extremely dangerous for those who don't have a home is the duration of the heat. It's a trend seen around the country. Phoenix, Arizona surpassed 43 degrees for 19 days in a row, beating a 49-year record.
Pets.
In Texas, where 9 prison inmates have died from excessive heat this year, families of the incarcerated gathered at the State House to beg for air-conditioned facilities.
Now we don't have nighttime cooling anymore. That's the problem. In a prolonged heat wave, it doesn't cool down at night anymore. Now we don't go below 34 degrees Celsius.
Forecasters see little relief in sight, with these high temperatures expected to continue at least another week. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, Clark County, Nevada.
In sports, Reggae Boys winger Damari Gray has been named in the CONCACAF Gold Cup Team of the Tournament. Jamaica crashed out of the Gold Cup after a 3-0 defeat by Mexico. Gray made his debut for the Reggae Boys in the tournament and registered 2 goals and 2 assists in 5 outings. He's the only Jamaican named in the team. Meanwhile, winner of the tournament, Mexico has 5 players on the team, including goalkeeper Guillermo Ochoa. There are 4 Panamanians along with the tournament's top scorer Jesus Ferreira from the United States. World champion Sharika Jackson won the women's 200 meters race at the World Athletics Continental Tour meet in Hungary on Tuesday. She won the race in 20.02 seconds ahead of athletes from Ireland and the Bahamas. Jackson is one of 3 Jamaican winners at the meet. The other Jamaican winners on the day were Johan Blake and Anjanette Knight. Blake sped to 10.04 to win the 100 meters men, and Knight clocked a personal best of 53.26 to win the women's 400 meter hurdles. And that's the news on PBCJ. You can follow us on our social media platforms at PBCJamaica. Thanks for watching.